some of our most beloved movies allow us to escape to worlds of pure imagination. But the reason we love them so much is that they still connect to our reality and we can relate to the characters. Some of the most compelling stories, though, that sometimes feel totally unbelievable, are actually 100% real and delivered to us through amazing documentaries. There are many documentaries out there to watch, but I sometimes feel like popular scripted films steal some of their shine. So in this episode, I'm going to move that light and allow it to shine on a few documentaries that I watched as part of my challenge. I also had an awesome opportunity to bring something special to this episode that I cannot wait to share with you. Roll the intro. In 2019, I watched 17 documentaries. The documentaries crossed multiple genres and told compelling stories using multiple techniques. Amy, for example, is a biographical documentary about the life of singer Amy Winehouse. The documentary uses a lot of personal footage and news footage mixed with narration taken from personal interviews. It's what I like to call an after-the-fact documentary. We already know of Amy's tragic and unfortunate ending, and this documentary tries to help us understand how she got there. Free Solo, on the other hand, was filmed in real time. Director Jimmy Chin is friends with his subject Alex Honnold, and he followed his attempt to free solo El Capitan in 2016. Now, if you don't know what free soloing is, it's when somebody climbs up the side of the mountain with absolutely no safety harnesses. The crew had to be a nervous wreck because they had no idea if their main subject was going to live or die. It made for a thrilling documentary. On a totally different spectrum is Apollo 11, which takes an event that we are all familiar with, but presents it back to us in a way that has never been seen. NASA footage was uncovered and edited together with no narration whatsoever to create this presence in that event that is just fascinating. For this episode, though, I did not want to put together just another standard movie review episode. I think a better way to shine a light on documentaries is to actually talk to somebody who has made a documentary and start to understand what it takes. This episode, I'm excited to present not just one, but two conversations with two amazing and talented filmmakers. My first conversation is with Shawn Kelley. Shawn is a first-time documentarian that was compelled to create a documentary after learning more and more about his father's time as a soldier during the Vietnam War. The result is the 2019 documentary, My Father's Brothers. Let's take a look.
Everything in Vietnam, if you're 18 years old, is an adventure. You don't really know fear until you're in a fight. I was having a good old time with a bunch of great guys. When you get in a fight, everything changes.
The battalion commander said we have to be 1,000 meters apart. We would cover more area.
Did you want your platoons to be 1,000 meters apart?
No.
I truly believe that we surprised them as much as they surprised us.
Maybe 4 or 5 shots rang out, and then the whole world erupted.
Grenades were being thrown in, mortars were hitting into our perimeter.
They were calling for help immediately.
We'd never run that fast in our lives. We were really close because the gray mud turned red. There was rivulets of blood in it.
The machine gun was empty. My M16 was empty. I was fairly certain we would be overrun.
We were all ready for them, and you could hear movement. We went to visit in Saigon, and there was a Vietnamese general. He said we were just all young men doing what our country's told us to do.
So, Shawn, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I definitely want to talk to you about a number of things, but first, let's get into your documentary. Let's talk about that and what it is and what it's about.
Okay. Yeah, well, so I grew up in a military family. My dad's retired military. He started off in airborne, and then, gosh, he retired lieutenant colonel and is as a deputy commander of the 5th Special Forces Group. And so at any given time, the 20 years he was in the Army, there was always, something going on about the Army. I mean, he had, just plaques or medals or things like that in his office at home. And, I knew a little bit about what he did. But honestly, there was a lot I didn't know. And this all kind of started, I had a long car ride with him. And if you know my dad, he's very much like, hey, how are you doing? How's your wife doing? How are your kids doing? And he just wants to help people. And, have you thought about this? Hey, what would be a good idea for you to do,
Yeah.
And that's the way. And so the whole way up for a 2.5-hour drive, it was all about me, talking about me. And we spent a couple of days at this conference he was at. And then I was driving him back home. And this is, about 4 or 5 years ago. And all the same questions kind of came up again. And I'm like, Dad, we talked about me the whole time. I said, let's talk about you. Tell me about when you went, graduated from the Citadel and you went into the Army as a second lieutenant. And for 20 years, what you did and your rank. And, let's talk about that. And I thought, I'm going to know it all. And I realized that there's a lot I didn't know. And that kind of really prompted some really thinking about what he went through. And I knew he was involved with this really horrific battle. And that really made me want to know more about it. So I got him to agree to have him, me interview him on film. And then he kind of one-upped me because this was probably just going to be a home movie that I was going to share with friends and family. And then he said to me, you know what? This was like in the fall a few years ago. And he said, in June, the 173rd Airborne is having a reunion down at Fort Benning, Georgia. Why don't you bring your equipment and you can interview some of the men that were in this battle with me? And I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is not going to be a home movie. I mean, this has the potential of being something real. So I worked with him to kind of do some more research and do a little bit of digging. And I had about 9 months, and I was kind of, this is my first feature film, Andreas. So, my day job is executive creative director. So I in an advertising and branding firm. So I work with directors and producers to make videos and commercials and things like that. So I know just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
There's a lot I didn't know. But I spent the next 9 months, learning to work my camera better, learning about audio, recording audio, lighting and editing, things like that. And my plan was I was going to be this one-man band. I was going to do this documentary, and it's going to be awesome. And a friend of mine who's a director, Joanne Hock, here in Charlotte, she's a wonderful director. She's kind of my mentor. She told me, take someone down there with you. You don't need to be doing these interviews by yourself. Focus on what there's, and I was like, no, I can do it all, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the first bit of advice I didn't listen to that I should have. But it was good. It was a great learning experience. And when I said I should have listened to it, what I mean is what these guys were saying. And I met these veterans the day before I interviewed them. Now, obviously, I know my dad, and I interviewed him 3 different times, and that was a piece of cake. But here's these guys, they're in their 70s, and I hadn't met them until the night before I interviewed them. And here I am with the camera and lights and the microphone and my headphones on, and I got to make sure the battery's not going to die and things like that. And then I realized, wow, I need to be. It's kind of hard to pay attention to what they're saying and monitor all of these things. Fortunately, and this is what was fantastic. Fortunately, they really opened up, and I saw a different side of this battle than what my dad told me. And not that he didn't tell me, I'm not even trying to cover anything up or anything, right? But I think because he's my dad, he was trying to protect me and not tell me all the terrible things. And these guys told me all the terrible things. And I was, I'm sitting here like looking over, make sure the battery's okay, trying not to cry, thinking about my next question. And I didn't expect it. It was so much more difficult than I thought. But yeah, the interviews actually turned out really, really well, despite all the challenges.
So one of the things you said made me think about something that I always think about with documentaries, which is there has to be so many of these films that the filmmakers go in thinking that they're going to make one movie and then come out making something completely different, right? That it has to kind of transform, unlike a regular feature film where you have a script and you have storyboards and all that stuff. Documentary, you don't have any of that. What did you, I guess, were these interviews kind of one of those inflection points for you as you made this film?
Yeah, from talking to my dad, I knew the basic story of this battle, but it went a couple of things. One, it went more in depth on that. So I saw a side of this battle that I was not familiar with. And so that was pretty amazing. And that changed the direction a little bit on the documentary, but also finding out kind of, a little bit of after the fact and what these guys are going through and still going through because of that day. I mean, one of the guys, I mean, he was in the military for a short period of time, got drafted, got trained, got sent overseas, and, as a very young man, probably 19 and fighting. And then he came back pretty traumatized and 50 plus years later, he still sleeps in a chair upright because, it was a lot to deal with. And I think that part of being a veteran, being a combat veteran, post-traumatic stress disorder, I was always familiar with those terms. I knew what they meant. I don't think I really knew what they meant until I interviewed these guys, and then it really opened my eyes as much as I can understand it without obviously going through it. But yeah, that was really a huge turning point for me in this film. I didn't expect that at all.
So let's talk a little bit about your kind of process to get the film made. You said you started out as this kind of one-man band. Where did you end up? Because I know that there's definitely a few credits on the film. Let's talk about that journey and how you went from this idea, like I got it, I can do all this, to building out the entire crew.
Yeah, so I think the one-man band, I think those probably work with somebody who's very much more an experienced filmmaker. I kind of lucked out with the interviews because they were all locked down and things like that. And technically, I got everything I needed. And fortunately, my questions and their answers really helped to form a fantastic story. But what I realized was when I got back home and I started editing things, well, first I had to make what they call proxy files because my computer couldn't handle the 4K footage that I filmed. That was a scary moment. Yeah. But then when I was, putting it all together, my first rough cut was 3 hours long. And of course that was too long. I got it down to 2.5. And then I think the last rough cut I did was maybe 2. And then I realized, what I know how to edit, but I'm not a film editor, at least not yet. And so I went back to Joanne Hock and I said, I said, I need some help. I said, let's talk about, who's out there and who could. And she recommended John Disher, who's an amazing cinematographer and editor. And it's funny because I've worked with him on commercial projects through the agencies, probably for 10 or 20 years, but I didn't really know him because he was part of the crew. And but I just, there's John, I know him, but I don't really know him, right? But so we sat down and had coffee and talked about the project. And I think the project really appealed to him after he saw the rough cut because it kind of reminded him of a relationship he had with his father, who was in the Coast Guard. And you know what? I'm absolutely blessed that he said, yeah, I'll help you out with this. I'll take it on, because he really brought so much to the storytelling. Something I couldn't do. And I think we worked really well together. And I made a new friend. And at the same time. So it was pretty amazing. So I had my mentor, who was kind of like, the wise sage, kind of a person. I had John, who was my director. And I had another buddy, Jason Hausman, who is actually a composer and sound designer. And he did the sound design for the film. And then he recommended, I asked if we could work with Ross Wissbaum, who is a sound engineer at Grand Crew Studios. And I presented the more edited version, the more edited, cut down version that John and I had worked on. And they looked at it and they were like, wow, let's do something together. So they were interested. And then the last key filmmaking crew member was Trinity Velas-Husto. And I just by chance met her at an event. Actually, Jason Hausman was speaking at this event, and she was there, and I just started talking to her and found out she was a composer. She was fairly new to Charlotte, and we met for coffee one day and started talking about my project. And she composes the style of music that I wanted, very orchestral and that sort of thing. And so in a series of kind of conversations, we decided to work together. And I had my little band of misfits all assembled, and I got to tell you, couldn't have done it without them. Filmmaking truly is a collaborative art form, because everybody brings their knowledge and their talents and their experience to it, and it elevates the story. And everybody brings a perspective that you may not be thinking about, and it's wonderful. I can't wait to do it again.
So was there? So the one thing that I was thinking about as you were saying that is, sometimes it's a little hard to kind of let people in on a project that's so personal, but when you start clicking with people, you have that moment of, oh man, I didn't even see it this way, or they present your work back to you, and it just kind of it feels brand new. Did you have one of those moments with the music or the edit or something like that?
Yeah, I had a number of those. One particular edit, I had tried to get this part of what my dad was saying, and what he was saying was great, but I just needed to condense down. I just didn't know how to connect the dots, and I tried early on. And then after I started working with John, he shared with me this, it was just like magic. It was just so simple, his solution, but his experience of filmmaking that did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't do that. That's amazing. Thank you. So that was an example of something I had in mind, but I couldn't get to it on my own. And he kind of showed me the way there. Trinity, when I was down visiting my daughter, who at the time was in med school down in Orlando, and I got a text from her that she had just emailed me the first music cue. And I was like, excuse myself. I went upstairs, got my laptop, put my headphones, and listened to it. So she had the opening sequence of the film, and with her music and everything. And I listened to it. I listened to it again, and I just started bawling. Just all of these emotions came out, and I was like, you know what? I'm working with the right composer, because I kind of communicate what I was looking for, but I'm not a composer, so sometimes I have to use layman terminology to but she understood what the film needed, and really, and she put her heart and soul into that score. It is absolutely amazing, and it really complements the story. She just did a wonderful job.
One of the things that I'm always curious about that I want to touch on here is writing for a documentary, right? Because kind of like we alluded to before, you have an idea of what this is going to be, but what does it mean to truly write a documentary?
All right, so that's a really good question. Sometimes it just means that you might start off kind of with an outline if you think of how the film's going to be. Once you film it and you start bringing it back in the editorial, you kind of realize, okay, the story might be going this way. So then the writing becomes more of a trying to shape it up just to get it to, to make sure everything's cohesive and everything's kind of working together. I got the film to a place, and not every documentary has a narrator. My style of doc that I did, and the narrator was me. So I kind of had the beginning, I had some narration, and the end, and a really tiny bit in the middle. And I actually, when I wrote that, I rewrote it a number of different times. And then when I also mentioned Patrick McLean, who was co-writer on the doc, because he's an amazing writer. I've worked with him a long time in advertising, but he's got a number of novels out and whatnot. But anyway, I showed him the rough cut, and I said, here's what I'm writing. What do you think? And it was interesting because he put together a couple of different scenarios of how the story could be told from a narration point of view. And some I was like, no, I think that's not right. And some of us like, wow, that's really interesting. So we kind of incorporated some of the ideas that he had and what I put together. And I think it was just the right amount, because it just kind of like, it brought some certain areas to life, in my opinion. So it was kind of a cool thing. So yeah, a little bit of a long answer to your question, but it can be for films that really don't have that voiceover, that narration. A lot of times the writing is just really making sense of the story.
What about research? Let's talk about research. So you had this germ of a story from your father. You had the 9 months in between. Did you do research prior to doing your interviews, or did that really start in earnest after you had the wealth of knowledge from the interviews?
Yeah, we did. And as a matter of fact, it's funny because my dad, for years, I was trying to get him to write a book, I said, Dad, it could be a number of different things. I think you have interesting stories to tell. And he never would. Well, now he's in his 80s, and with this documentary, he decided, I've got to write a book about this. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad you decided now. But it's actually great because that process really helped with the research. So I was talking to him a lot about the battle and things like that. But, you think about it, 50 years has gone by, maybe some things didn't happen the way you think they did. And he was very committed to making sure that everything was correct, mainly for his book. But I wasn't going to go nearly into that much detail in the film as he would in his book. So he started talking to members of his company and things like that, and then he would share that information with me, and then he would actually started talking to a few people at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, which is just a true gem of this country. And he got a lot of information there. So in his book, it probably is written a little bit more for a military audience, but read it just because of the way, because have some like dialogue, and then it'll be interrupted with an after action report after a battle or something like that. So all of that really helped kind of frame up how some of the details that are really super important in the story, and so that's kind of was the guide I took. So what some of these guys went through, I kind of knew, so that helped with my questions when I was talking to them. But like I said earlier, it was what they told me I wasn't prepared for, just because of what they faced. I just couldn't imagine.
So you got your film done. Now let's talk about distribution, right?
Okay.
And how you get this out there in front of people. Documentaries, unfortunately, are not something that, AMC is looking to put in a multiplex. It usually takes a lot for a documentary to kind of reach this public zeitgeist to be at that level. Right. So I think most documentaries probably go through like the film festival circuit. How did you get your doc out for people to see?
Well, and actually it's still in the festival circuit. So yeah, I will tell you, and the distribution part is pretty complicated. When I finished the film, I told everybody jokingly, okay, I've made my first feature film. Now I'm done with part one of making a film.
Right.
You know, I mean, I learned all of that the hard way, right? And now I'm learning the rest the hard way too. So, yeah, the film festival circuit is certainly one avenue to go, and you know, it helps get eyes and communities on it, to understand it, to see it, and so that's what I've done. I've been in a number of festivals. We've been in, I think, 14 festivals, and been very fortunate to get 4 Best Documentary Awards and I think 3 or 4 Audience Choice Awards in the festivals. So it's been great. Now I've learned a lot too about festivals. Not every film is right for every festival, and I didn't realize that going into this process. You know, for mine, you know, it certainly can appeal to military and military families and veterans, but not necessarily. I mean, you know, I've got a number of my friends and people that have seen it that really have been touched by it that have nothing to do with the military. But part of the aspect of the story is, as we say in the advertising business, they're the low-hanging fruit, right? So looking at festivals in maybe that are held in military towns, that's certainly one way to go. And really the idea behind the festivals are to, and it's a little bit different now because of COVID, but back when they were in person, it was fantastic because, you know, I could be on the stage after the screening and talk about it with some filmmakers or veterans that were in the film and have a Q&A with the audience. And then so often I would talk to a number of the, you know, people in the audience afterwards. And so and it was great, you know, it was a wonderful experience, but that's just a way of really, you know, getting more eyes on it. So now I'm kind of getting towards the end of the festival run, and I'm really kind of looking at just different options. I've talked to a few different people, from sales agents to distributors. I've even have considered self-distribution, but you know, I don't know if I want to go there. So anyway, it's all options right now, and I'm just trying to figure out what the right next step is to get it out. Because when I started this process, Andreas, it was I didn't really have an idea that I'm going to make a film that's going to be in theaters or it's going to be on Netflix or something like that. None of, you know, I was just like, hey, I'm going to make a film. You know, it's going to be great because it's about my dad. And it was important because it was that, but it became even more important when I met these veterans. And like I said, I didn't meet them until the night before I interviewed them. And now we're all Facebook friends. You know, I get texts from them from time to time, and, you know, like, hey, when's the next screening going to be? Or, you know, I think this needs to be made into a narrative feature. You know, Mark Wahlberg needs to play me, you know, stuff like that. And it's been so rewarding on so many different levels. I can't tell you, but what I want to honor their story is to be able to get more eyes on the film.
Yeah.
And so that's really my goal now, is trying to figure out what's the best route to do that.
So in looking at the documentaries that I watched in my movie challenge, there's definitely different genres of documentary, right? And one of the ones that I absolutely like kind of latched onto was Free Solo. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's I think it's National Geographic documentary. Now, one of the differences between this style of documentary and kind of something like you created is you're talking about a historical event. Whereas in this case, the documentarians are in real time following the narrative. So I think you've seen Free Solo. First of all, what are your thoughts on that movie? And then we'll talk about the style of documentary.
Sure. I loved Free Solo. I think that's the, you know, just to kind of, you know, what a person can do, what they can overcome, what they can accomplish when they're really totally driven. That always makes for an interesting story, but also just the danger involved. It was just amazing. Of course, it was very beautiful. Jimmy Chin, the cinematographer, director, you know, he's a climber, and just that also kind of blew my mind too, because of what that crew had to undergo. I mean, different cameras placed on the rock faces here and there on the top of the mountain, and it was pretty intense. Mine was more of a lockdown camera, and then some handheld and things like that. So it was totally different, and mine was pretty safe. No one's probably wouldn't die in mine.
Right.
And so you have that element of danger, which I personally I'd be too uncomfortable if something happened on the set like that. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I immediately thought of when I was watching that film is, he is filming because they're all friends, right? I mean, it's not a random like connection. Jimmy knows Alex, and they're actual friends and everything. So, and like you said, he is a climber himself, so he understands the peril of the event. So on the one hand, he is coming at it as a filmmaker and wanting to document this and make this documentary. But on the other hand, this is his friend that's up there putting himself in peril, and you have no idea what's going to happen. He could literally be filming the moment of his friend's death.
Yeah.
And so it does create some high tension and drama, but it's a different style of filmmaking from anything else. If somebody were to ask you, hey, what are some documentaries I should check out? Do you have any that come to mind that you would recommend?
It's always hard because it's kind of like saying, what's your favorite song? I'm like, I don't know, because it changes everything. But I will say Fishmen is a documentary about the fishing industry and how hit it was up in Massachusetts, and how it's hit so hard over a number of years, and how the fishing industry is changing worldwide. That's a fantastic documentary. Is currently on the circuit. Actually, it's screening at the Coronado Island Film Festival in 11th through the 15th. That's an amazing film. I caught that when it was playing in the Charlotte Film Festival. It was a wonderful film. One of my two music films that kind of come to mind: Muscle Shoals.
Yes,
that is amazing. It's so good.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knew this little music studio, sound studio in was it Alabama?
Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Yep.
Yeah. And then could just turn out so many just amazing records for all these incredible artists. And then another one, and this is one of the guys in my dad's company in Vietnam is from Gay Lakes, Virginia. And this was a happy accident, but I found out there's this one doc was filmed in Gay Lakes called Fiddlin'. And it's all about kind of bluegrass and what's the other word? Traditional music, as they call it. Absolutely amazing. It was really, really well done. So that was fantastic. Oh, and then of course I gotta say Purple Dreams, and Purple Dreams is directed by my friend Joanne Hock here in Charlotte, and it follows some of the kids from the Northwest School of Arts as they put on the production of The Color Purple a number of years ago, and it is an absolutely riveting film. So that's another one. It is absolutely worth watching for sure.
It's definitely the one of the strong powers of documentary to surface these stories that otherwise people would not know about, and do it in such a way that resonates with you and stays with you, similar to your film. So I definitely appreciate that you put your passion behind this project and you're sharing it with everybody, and I appreciate your time with me today.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. I've enjoyed it. Always happy to talk films and filmmaking. As you said, when you're making your films, your videos, you learn each time, and that's what it's all about, man. We never stop learning, and hey, it took me, let's see, 50 years to become a filmmaker.
Yeah,
Never too late.
It was so great to meet Shawn and talk about his journey. Maybe that conversation will inspire another new documentarian. I really hope you get a chance to watch My Father's Brothers soon, and I cannot wait to see what Shawn does next. My next conversation was made possible thanks to my friend and director of 20 Weeks, the 200th movie I watched in 2019, Lena Pandarker. After I decided that I wanted to talk to a documentarian, I reached out to Lena, and she introduced me to my next guest, Marissa Aroy. Marissa is the Emmy Award-winning director of the PBS documentary Sikhs in America, as well as the director of the PBS documentaries Little Manila, Filipinos in California's Heartland, and the Delano Manogs, Forgotten Heroes of the United Farm Workers. Marissa is the co-founder of Media Factory and is currently working on her next project, the Philippine-America War. Now, before we get into the conversation, I want to give a disclaimer that unfortunately some of the video quality you will see suffered from internet degradation, which I tried to edit around as much as possible. Now, I am honored to present my conversation with Marissa Aroy. Marissa, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very, very excited to have you on my video.
Andre. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks to Lena. Shout out to Lena Pandarker.
What I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of where you started kind of early on, and then get into kind of the career and documentary filmmaking and things like that. So looking at kind of where you started, one of my first episodes, I focused completely on me as, you know, how I fell in love with movies and filmmaking and things like that, as to why I would even attempt to watch a movie a day. So that's kind of the same thing I wanted to learn about you. You know, where did you grow up? How did you kind of fall in love with films as a basis for where you are today?
Well, it really came from my father when I think about it. My father in the Philippines worked for a film company. He was a bookkeeper for Sampaguita Pictures. And so he always loved movies. And we didn't get along at all on most things. We were always in conflict. But the one place where it was like everything was smooth and peaceful and we both loved was going to the movies. And that was always the treat for us, for me and him, was to be able to go to the movie theater, watch a James Bond movie, watch whatever it was. And then the same thing when VHS tapes came out and Betamax. Yeah. We had Betamax, and then we had VHS tapes, and like, you know, Blockbuster. And what was it even before Blockbuster? There was like another video store before that. That was a chain. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And like the whole world of movies opened up then, right? Because it was more than just like the big tentpole pictures. It was indie films, or it was obscure films, or it was B movies that came in Bakersfield, of all places. So that kind of, that love of movies really started with him. I could say, that's one of the things I picked up from him.
Going to the video store was definitely a magical moment. And I love how we have instant access to all of this content now, but you lose that whole wonder of walking down the aisles and seeing a cover that just like, what is this? You know?
Oh, it was so great. I mean, I love that about my growing up childhood, like having the music stores, right? Like rifling through albums and then rifling through CDs, right? And the same thing with VHS, with like those video stores. It was like rifling through, like, what is this? I've never heard of this movie before. And just getting to know different movie directors or movies, or even genres of movies, right? Like finding out there's a documentary section here, or there's an art section there, or there's foreign language films as well. That's kind of when like the whole universe of films opened up for me, was being able to see that. And then my favorite job as a teenager was when I worked at a video store. It was like my fantasy dream, like perfect job was working at a video store. and nobody came in. Nobody came in. So all I did was like pop in a video every day, pop in like multiple videos every day, and just literally just watch from the counter.
So in looking at that, and you kind of, you know, found that love, that connection with your father. And it's funny you say that, right? Because my connection was actually with my father as well. And it was a family thing. And that, you know, pushes you into like, I want to work in the video store and everything. Was there a moment where you really thought to yourself, I really want to pursue filmmaking as a career?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember in middle school when my friend and I would pretend to hold up Oscars and give our speeches and just play with the video cameras. In middle school, we started to like create skits and like talk shows and stuff. And I think in my junior year in high school, my father was like, okay, well, where are you going to go to college and what are you going to study? Mm-hmm. And I said, I want to study film. I want to be a filmmaker. And he was like, no. You're a minority. You're a woman. You know no one in that industry. No. Be an accountant or a doctor or a lawyer. Yep. It was like, those are the three things that he thought like it was possible.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I asked that is, you know, filmmaking for a lot of people is in that dream category, right? It's and you have to decide for yourself, you know what, I'm actually going to take that chance. I'm going to pursue it. So when you did that, thinking about your education, and you said you want to go to school for filmmaking, I think you have a minor in psychology, or I mean, sorry, a major in psychology as your undergrad. So what was your thinking on your trajectory to get to where you are from an educational standpoint?
Well, I ended up going to Boston College, and I was majoring in psychology, but it was really because I was in the pre-med program. Mm. So I was trying to find a major that aligned with that I also liked. So I did enjoy psychology. I enjoyed trying to figure out what motivates people. And I think I use that to this day in documentary. But I had always wanted to take a film class. And Boston College had one film class, and I think it was just literally a film studies class. It wasn't even a filmmaking class. And I could never get in. They had maybe 9 spaces available for students in that class. And like freshman year to senior year, mm-hmm. It was always full before I was able to register for it. So I never got into a filmmaking class.
Oh, wow.
There. Yeah. And then so what happened was I ended up going into the Peace Corps, and I sort of told my parents that after Peace Corps, I will start considering medical school, where I'm going to go and stuff. That's basically what I told my parents, my father especially. And I think he really didn't understand what I was doing at the time. How he put it was, they drove me to the airport. I was going to the Dominican Republic for Peace Corps. And they said, we left the third world so you could live in the first world. And you're leaving the first world for the third world? We don't understand why. Right. So I was just a strange bird to them.
Yeah.
American daughter. But it was really like being away from what they wanted for me, being in a different country and trying and just having a moment to think like, what is it that I want in my life, that I started to think about filmmaking again. And I think the experience of being in the Dominican Republic, seeing different parts of South America in particular, and then the Caribbean, I started to kind of bring them together into what I didn't know was called documentary. I just thought of them as these National Geographic videos. Mm-hmm. That was something I wanted to do with that. Something about real life. But yeah, I didn't call it documentary at that time.
So an interesting parallel, I guess, for us is, my family's from Puerto Rico, and, I grew up mostly in kind of outside my house. I was American Andres, right? But inside the house, I'm Puerto Rican Andres. You have this dual identity that you're always dealing with, right? And it definitely seems like you had that same experience. I got to a point where, because I'll be honest, when I was younger, especially middle school and high school, and you're trying to find yourself, there really is I think for a lot of dual cultural kids, you have this whole thing where it's like, I don't want to be different. I just want to put, the Filipino side of myself, the Puerto Rican side of myself aside so people can just see me as American and accept me and all this stuff. But then me personally, I got to a point when I got to college where I took that off the shelf. I was like, no, that's a big part of who I am. And I was proud of it. And so I watched your documentary on the Filipinos in Stockton, and it was amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. And there was a pride that came through on that. So explain to me kind of how you got to that as a subject, and what I also want to know is what your father thought of it.
Well, it's interesting. It took a while. It took a while to be proud of being Filipino and feel like we had stories to tell, that we valued our stories. And it took me working for a Japanese American filmmaker who had made several films, several documentaries about the Japanese American experience, including the internment camps, what happened during World War II, and him saying, at some point you should make something about the Filipino American experience.
I remember thinking at the time that our immigration story was not of value to anyone,
including myself.
It took working with him and seeing how he approached it to do more inquiry into my own community.
The story in Little Manila was so interesting from a number of different angles. One, I had no idea that Little Manila even existed, right? I've been in that area of town, and so the history that was there, the number of people who came into this country through, that area of Stockton, California to Little Manila. But then on top of that, it was, kind of disheartening to see the same story kind of play out where that history was erased. So looking at documentaries and documentary filmmaking, do you feel a certain sense of responsibility now that you're kind of in this career to tell these kind of stories?
Yes, in a way that I never felt before. I think when I made Little Manila, I had the opportunity given to me, and I felt like this was my one chance, and I crammed as much of history of the Filipino American history in California as I could into this one little 30-minute thing, right? And then when we unpacked that, when we were done with that, and we saw that this story about Larry Itliong was really interesting, and there was more to tell. And there was more to tell because of the involvement with the United Farm Workers, their involvement in the United Farm Workers. That was also based on my curiosity of it, and me finally seeing the value in telling the stories about the Filipino American community and the history of the Filipino American community in the United States. And then it's a weird position to be in now, because I feel like now I see more of the stories. There's like all the possible stories there that could be told. And it's also that the community shares what they think are the important stories too. So we see them, or I see them. There are others who are making the stories as well, and it's sort of, to me, it's growing, right? The technology is allowing so many more people to make documentaries. There's just, online media is allowing us to put things up, whether they're short or longer pieces. So there's just more opportunity there. But now I have this weird feeling of having this responsibility, and I don't think it's a good thing to feel that pressure, like I have to deliver something.
Yeah.
So that's probably like the the pressure responsibility side that I'd like to, as much as possible, let go of, because it is stifling.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think the only person who's putting that pressure is myself.
I think, with the work that you've done so far has just been a huge benefit to, everyone, not only, the Filipino culture, but, the people who get to learn about it through that. Because, again, I think back to when I moved to North Carolina in middle school. When I moved here, I started 7th grade in Dudley, North Carolina. My dad was in the Air Force. And one of the first questions that I got when I was at school, you can't really talk during the day. You get to lunchtime. It's like, all right, now I get to talk and meet some friends. One of the first questions I received was, so what are you? Right? You don't look black. You don't look white. What are you?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there wasn't a lot of exposure to Latinos and people that look like me. And if there was, it was only through very small representation in media that probably was not flattering at all. So,
right.
Telling our stories is very, very important.
When I was in kindergarten, I remember somebody asking me that question. This is in Bakersfield, California. What are you? And I said, immediately, Indian. I don't know what came over me. I just said, I'm Indian. But I meant Native American, right?
Yeah.
And they asked, like, do you live in a teepee? And I said, no, stupid. We live in houses like everyone else.
Yeah.
But I had immediately intuited that I can't say Filipino. They wouldn't know what Filipino is.
Right.
So I'm going to say something that like is in the, the atmosphere of like media, right?
Right.
Indians who live in teepees.
I went a little bit more smart ass with mine. I just said, I'm human.
Yeah.
So that did not go over well. All right, so let's get into the actual kind of process creation of documentary side of things. What makes a documentary great for you, right? So stepping back, not even just looking at your personal work, but just looking at documentaries in general, what makes a good documentary for you?
Immediately when I see good cinematography, of course, then I give it more attention. Chef's Table, for instance, the documentary series on food by Netflix, the way they film the food, the way the camera dollies over the chef's prep table, the close-ups of the knife cutting into a mushroom, the delicacy of like preparing it, the close-ups of everything aesthetically about it, right? You're in a safe pair of hands, and it's just this visual candy, right? So of course it's about food as well. So everything is sort of heightened. You salivate over the pictures of it, and it's also interesting to me, like the preparation, how somebody gets a restaurant going, how they're finding the food, all this stuff. So, I mean, I think it just depends on the individual. Even more with documentary than I think with mainstream Hollywood narrative fiction, where like you have a Marvel movie and people are watching because they know they're going to be entertained, and they can just kind of sit and watch passively, right? And be and that's the reason why you go, because you want an escape, you want to be entertained, you want to be kind of wowed by the special effects of it, right? It's not the story, because the storyline is all very similar.
Right.
It's the same arc, right? We know there's a bad guy, the world's about to collapse, and then the superheroes come and save it, eventually. And yet we want to fall into that kind of rhythm again and again and again. It's comforting and it's entertaining. With a documentary, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. A lot of them use the same type of arc, but some of them just take you on a different place and make you engage in a different way.
All filmmaking is a collaborative effort at the end of the day. Can you talk about the different kind of roles and collaborators that you have when you're creating a documentary?
Well, for me, it's very different. I work with my husband and my filmmaking partner, Niall McKay. We have worked together since 2003. Basically, we met, we started dating, and we started filming together. So I've had the privilege of having somebody work with me, both interchanging director producer roles, and just having my back and being each other's camera person. And so I've always had that base. And then if we have money, then we have more crew. And in that sense, like when you have more money and you have more crew, then it becomes like a narrative film where you need to hire so many people.
With documentaries, especially if you're doing a documentary where it's kind of something that you're documenting in real time, there's definitely more of a sense of you don't know what you're going to get and you have to react to that.
Yes, you're very much present. You have to be so, like, talk about presence and awareness. Like you're on. You're so on. You're so listening to everything. You're listening for the environmental sound. Are you going to be able to record what they're saying well? You're thinking about, where is that person going? Where are they going to go next? Because where do I bring the camera next? Like, where am I going to position myself to film this best? But you're also listening and thinking like, okay, are they about to talk about this? Do I need to come in? Do I need to push in and get a close-up of this? Or do I need to step out and step away? And you're making those decisions immediately, constantly, moment by moment. And also thinking like, do I need to get the other shot? Right? So do I have my wide shot? Do I have my medium shot? Do I have a cutaway? Do I have this? Am I also getting what I need on camera with them saying it on camera? So it's this, like, I'm getting very excited talking about it, but verite filming is the most alive you can be filming.
So it sounds like you're actively in the moment, writing, editing, directing, like everything. There's no pickups here, right? It's
absolutely. Well, but you do have to think about that as well. If you need something redone, if you need them to pick up that spoon again, right, or hold the knife this other way and redo that, you do have the flexibility to do that. And so it's not pure verite in that, like, you're just a fly on the wall. Right. You do have to remember as well that as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, that there are things that you can manipulate for your camera, right? Can you make it brighter? Can you add more lights in the scene so that your camera will capture what it needs to capture without ruining the scene, right? Without ruining the magic.
So let me ask you this, because this is something I've always wondered with documentaries. When you look at, especially things that are kind of more like you're in the moment, and then it cuts to, some deeper kind of context through an interview or something like that. Yeah. Is that like in the moment you're thinking, oh, I need to come back and revisit this through an interview, or, how does that process usually work out? Or does an interview kind of like spur, oh, I should go get this because they said this in an interview? Like, how do interviews play in?
If you have the ability to be with a subject for a while, you want to wait for that interview until they're comfortable with you. You don't want to have the interview be the first thing, because they're not going to be as open with you. They're not going to be comfortable with you. They're not going to be themselves.
Right.
I teach practical documentary right now at Trinity College, Dublin, and I'm having the students do their B-roll footage first, meaning following their subject in some type of activity or filming them doing something that illustrates something about this person, riding a horse, walking the dog, preparing a meal, something like that. It allows the subject to get used to you and the camera. And hopefully after a few times of that, then you can sit somebody down. And maybe you have a better sense of them as well. They've gotten to know you and you've gotten to know them. So that when you ask your questions, they're a little bit more informed than what you would have asked if that had been the first time meeting them.
Right.
And it changes all the time, right? You write a treatment, you think the story is going to be this about this person, and those things change. You find out something else about this person, like Capturing the Friedmans, for instance. Capturing the Friedmans was supposed to be about a birthday clown. And come to find out his whole rich story of his family, that there was a big scandal there, molestation of possible students, and it dived into a whole other different world. And you have to allow for that in documentary, that the story might not be what you think it is.
In looking at your subjects, is there a certain strategy that you use? So if you say, I want to do, you have this idea of doing a documentary about a particular subject, what's the strategy for finding people to be a part of this and interview and things like that?
Again, it's like what access do you have to them? And it always starts with a phone call, a meetup, trying to get a sense of the person in real life, and having them get a sense for you as well and what you want to do. And it doesn't always work that way. I mean, sometimes if it's, for instance, Tammy Duckworth, a senator from Illinois, it's a very formal process of trying to make dates for when she has time for a 30-minute interview, and it's just at this point right here, and that's all the time you have with her. And so you have to make the most of it, right? Yep. And you have to kind of be very present and allow her to understand what you're trying to do as well. But if you had the opportunity, it's really trying to meet that person in person, so you can get the sense of each other. But with documentary, just like in fiction, you are casting. Mm-hmm. You're casting for trying to figure out who is going to make an interesting subject on TV, on camera. And sometimes it's not who you think it is. The person who's very gregarious in real life can often freeze up in the camera. And it's sometimes the quiet person who can be more profound and focused with what they're saying.
The other thing you talked about was writing. How does the writing process work when it comes to documentaries?
There are two very similar things with fiction and nonfiction writing, which is that you write a treatment. You write what you think the story is going to be. You absolutely need to do that for your funders, for the grants, the grant applications you're writing. You need people to understand that you think you know what the story is. And it's not even that you think you know what the story is. This is the story. This is the treatment. And you set out, that's your blueprint, right? This is what I'm going to try to film. Now from there, because it's real life, anything could happen in between. Right. But you're trying to use that as your plan of action. Okay? This is the story. This is the beginning of it. I have to write. So I'm going to have to film here and here. I'm going to have to interview this person for that. I'm going to have to get this archival footage, or I'm going to have to film that performance. All of that is laid down. It helps you with your logistics, with your production plan. If it changes, then you're changing the treatment, right? It's a working treatment. Meaning that you're constantly changing it in your head, but it's also written down so that your funders know, your grant writers know, or your grantors know what's happening with it. you're telling people like, okay, well, this has changed because we're now following this one historical figure because of his involvement with exploiting the natives,
Right.
for instance. So yeah, you have to have a plan, and the treatment is the plan.
So looking at your projects, whether it's something you've directed or produced, have you had that experience where you go in thinking one thing and then it may kill the project? And like, there's nothing, this is more dead end, or vice versa, where it's like, yeah, this is going in a completely different direction and it's just wonderful. And we would, this is so much better than we could have imagined.
Well, there's different places where the story will change, right? So you write the story in pre-production. You've written your treatment. This is going to be your plan. Then you go and film it. And what happens in filming is a whole other thing, right? Mm-hmm. That changes the story. Changes like, we were able to film this, but we caught this. This interview didn't work out, but this interview was amazing. Or we discovered this other part of the story. So your story changes again in production. And then in post, a whole other thing again. And that happens in fiction as well, right? Where somebody's filmed this and, so supposedly they're going to follow a script, but the film that they actually filmed becomes a different thing, becomes a different entity. And if you have an amazing editor, that editor sees what that story is, what's in the can, right, what your footage is. And so for Delano Manungs, for instance, the Forgotten Heroes of the United Farm Workers, it was supposed to be sort of this evergreen story, and it is an evergreen story, but how he approached it, how we approached it, becomes something totally different, right? And that was just this discovery of one archival piece of footage that he saw was very poignant. And then the fact that, oh, wait, I think I have the audio to that somewhere else. We put it together, and that's what bookends our story, is this footage and this little interview with some of the Manungs. And I never would have thought about it that way. So in terms of collaboration, when you're saying like, it takes a number of creatives coming together and allowing for that creative process to kind of burgeon out into the collective, into creating something better than what you had begun with.
So let's move on to kind of after we make the documentary. So what are your strategies once you have this documentary made? What are your strategies for getting it out in front of audiences? What are the different avenues that, may be a little bit different for documentaries?
Yeah, there's a whole thing about this now. It's called impact producing, and people have now what they call an impact plan. So I think when we came out with Delano Manungs, I don't think I understood sort of the lack of educational videos for Filipino Americans, and our educational distribution was big there. It's probably, if there's anything I'm proud about, it's that it's gotten into schools, it's gotten into universities, and it's gotten into high schools and libraries, and that was a big deal. And Delano Manungs, I think, was the thing that really informed me how important it is to think about distribution. Beyond like having a broadcast or being in film festivals, distribution, particularly to the community, to my Filipino American community, has been probably the most rewarding thing. And that's sort of happened, it's happened through organizations, so partnering up with all these different organizations, the Filipino American National Historical Society, with AAAS, Asian Association for Asian American Studies, different smaller groups in different states all over, and people sort of hearing from from social media that this little documentary is out there and wanting to see it and show it to their communities. And Filipino Americans we just don't have that much material out there. So it's been really lovely to see how it's gotten out to the different places.
So what about film festivals? I think you touched on that just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's still kind of pretty important as far as getting eyeballs on your work?
Well, as somebody who runs a film festival, my husband and I run the Irish Screen America Film Festival in New York and Los Angeles. So contemporary Irish films in both those areas. I think film festivals are very important. But do film festivals get out to my community in particular? Some do. Some of the Asian American film festivals get to my community to a certain extent, but it's sort of a one-time thing. If you see it there, great. If you didn't,
right.
So, but it's all kind of building up. You know, you have your distribution plan. You try to get it into film festivals. You try to get awards if you can, or a write-up if you can, because you're just trying to build buzz about your film. Right? It allows you to say, hey, this film that we did is in New York at this film festival, or in Los Angeles, or in Canada, or here, or showing here. And all of that kind of just adds to people becoming more interested in it.
Gotcha.
Which is what happened with Delano Manong's, right? It just kind of built up, just like anything else. The buzz, the reputation, like this interest, and you're just trying to get people to watch it.
So is it definitely, I guess it sounds like it's a strategy to do a lot of that kind of work ahead of time before looking for a larger distribution deal kind of thing?
Oh, no. I know you are, like, from the very beginning, you're trying to think, where is this going to be distributed? So we're working on another documentary about the Philippine-American War. And we already knew to talk to our partners at the Center for Asian American Media to talk about, like, how is that going to be on PBS? Who would be interested in it? Would ITVS be interested in it? But we're targeted on to try to do it try to give it to PBS, and anyone who's trying to create a documentary, you want to think about where it's going to go in the end, in terms of distribution. You want to try to get a distribution deal if you can beforehand. Often that's not possible without having some type of trailer or something that shows, like, this is what the look of it is. But yeah, you want to know what your end game is.
In looking, kind of at the work that you've done, and obviously you said that, you teach documentary filmmaking at the university level. What advice do you give to people who truly want to pursue documentary filmmaking?
Documentary doesn't have to be something that's so far away from you. You have the technology in your hands with your smartphone. Mm-hmm. You have the people who have access to your loved ones, the person who's next to you in the other room. Start asking them questions, because even if it's not valuable to somebody else, it's going to be valuable to you. So start documenting them first and start making those films. Right? You've got your own archival library of your own photographs. And there's always questions to ask the people that you love that you haven't asked them about. That's the simplest way to start.
All right. So in closing, last thing, what are you working on now, and where can people catch some of your stuff? And I'll link to some of it on the website and with the video.
Yeah, cool. So right now, I was talking about The Ferry, which is a short fiction film which we filmed here in Ireland, and that is playing. We have it on Vimeo, but it's playing in a couple of film festivals, and you can see it on our website where it'll be playing. And then we're also working on another Filipino and Filipino-American documentary called The Philippine-American War, 1899, 1902, historical documentary. And that's in the research phase right now.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey.
Thanks, Andres.
That conversation was a lot of fun, and the insight given by Marissa will allow me to appreciate the art of documentaries even more. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for taking this deeper look at documentaries with me. My 365 Movie a Day challenge has been a more rewarding journey than I could have ever imagined, and is now even more special thanks to filmmakers Shawn, Kelley, and Marissa Aroy. Until next time, try and watch a movie a day, or at least one documentary today.